Hello, my name is Dr. Terry A. Hurlbut, and I am your host for Declarations of Truth, and the owner, editor, and publisher of Conservative News and Views. Today, I thought I'd share a bit about myself, the site, and this channel. Before I do, I will say that I have left a link in the description to Conservative News and Views. I also want you to check out the awesome CNAV Store. Scroll down near the bottom for that link. Lots of good merchandise there, especially this t-shirt that I have chosen for today. It shows the likeness of Plato, one of the greatest philosophers of Western civilization, and one profound statement he made: no one is more hated than he who speaks the truth. Well, each of you listening to my autobiography, as it were, will have to make your own decision along that line. And now, to begin. I was born in Virginia to a Reserve Army engineering officer and an authentic Southern belle. I began my life with one foot on each side of the North-South divide left over from the war between the states. In fact, I had ancestors on both sides of that war. When I was 6, my father went to Harvard Business School on a scholarship, so we moved to a suburb of Boston. As he graduated, we moved around a bit, as his first job was in Pennsylvania, his next in Tennessee, after that, Dallas, Texas. In Tennessee, I joined the Boy Scouts. Within 3 years, I made Eagle. I have lots of fond memories from those days, and an extra education in civics, U.S. history, and some survival skills. Along with scouting, I discovered a love of history, and among other things, studied the war between the states. However, given my family dynamics, I wound up studying it from both perspectives. I don't know how many Americans can say that today. As you might imagine, my study of history, and especially the war between the states, instilled in me a healthy skepticism of government and a direct appreciation of the sort of road good intentions actually pave. During my schooling, I learned about something else: opportunistic politicians playing on people's fears, and playing both sides too. I'll give you an example that I personally lived. The policy known as desegregation busing was the reconstruction of my day. I saw one city make any effort not to have that policy make the segregation permanent. The magnet school program in Memphis, Tennessee. It was a good idea, but not nearly enough. If the government had improved all the schools, and the kind of, for lack of a better word, domestic student exchange program that busing really was intended to be, would have worked as advertised. Only they didn't do anything for the inner city schools. Result, the whites fled and they never came back. And then the same Democrats who invented segregation to begin with, well, some of them started pushing busing just to punish whites for voting Republican, while others didn't want to take part in it themselves. Among them, an up-and-coming politician named Joseph Robinette Biden. Ladies and gentlemen, first, you don't want to hear the reasons he gave. Second, please notice how the laws they pass, they somehow never want to have apply to themselves. Now, while all this was going on, I finished high school and went off to Yale College. This was a step up for me in a lot of ways. I have not enjoyed much social success. Besides having to move every 4 or 5 years, I wouldn't have been able to figure out the social cues even if I hadn't changed communities so often. Now, back then, no one ever heard of the phrase autism spectrum, though the medical establishment did know what autism was. In fact, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 3rd edition, DSM-3, as it read when I would later go to medical school, listed 2 diagnoses on what we call the spectrum today: infantile autism and childhood onset pervasive developmental disorder. Those 2 diagnoses sound dire, and they are. they're probably on the max end of the spectrum, especially the first. So the one counselor who addressed that issue in me didn't want to apply either one. So he told me that I was right on the borderline. Today, a knowledgeable psychologist or psychiatrist would say that I had Asperger's syndrome, which means I am a pathological but very able nerd, able to function very well at school or work, but less able to win friends and influence people, to paraphrase Dale Carnegie. But Yale was so big that being a nerd didn't matter. 5,000 undergraduates, 10,000 master's and PhD students, to say nothing of the various professional schools, including medicine, made for a community that almost did not care whether someone missed the social cues or not. Nor was I the only one of my kind at Yale, either. Bottom line, enough people at Yale could get past the strange ways, and when they heard my take on things I'd seen, our lessons, and current events, they listened. Things weren't so good at Baylor College of Medicine, where I matriculated in 1980. When I enrolled, everybody there was a Longhorn, an Aggie, a Rice Thresher, or a Baylor Bear. There were other issues, namely my discovering that clinical medicine, working with patients, just didn't fit. So I intended to specialize in laboratory medicine, pathology. Turned out that anatomical pathology, meaning autopsy, surgical pathology, and so on, didn't fit either. So I spent 5 years as a clinical pathologist and lab co-director in 250-bed community hospitals. One of them was the original Paul Kimball Hospital that took in the casualties from such famous mass casualty events as the fire and wreck of the Andrea Doria and the destruction of the airship Hindenburg. The other was the big hospital in Mount Holly, New Jersey. And while I was working there, I met the lovely lady who would become my wife for 8 years and 9 months. That ended tragically in her death from cancer. Why am I not working that kind of job today? Because only one hospital lab director ever saw the potential of having a dedicated clinical pathologist take away the distraction of having to review and sign off on the laboratory's policies every year. So he and his colleagues could concentrate on moving the meat. Now, what ended up happening to him is unimportant, except that it cut my career short. Let that be a lesson to you. When you lead an enterprise, it's not just about you. It's about those who work for you. Never forget that. Now, what you really need to appreciate is that in a typical pathology practice, when it comes time to sign off on the policies, the doctors all play a game of low-ball poker to select who gets that chore. Or they fob it off on the most junior pathologist in the outfit. You know the drill. Let George do it. Just remember that the next time any doctor stands on his credentials to tell you to take something you don't know anything about. Now, one part of my background that I haven't mentioned yet is my faith. My father was a Protestant Episcopalian, and that's what I became. And at the time, the Episcopal Church was still serious about the faith. In some of the routines, like the confirmation class, I found structure and at least some respect for the ideals of truth and justice. Justice is my strongest passion and always has been and always will be. I don't always get it, but I will always try to deal justly with others. But that also means I seek justice and will advocate for systems that do best at ensuring true justice and not the kind of special favors that pass for social justice today. But the Episcopal Church strayed further and further from the faith. I will also say the Episcopal Church did not impress me with the spiritual guidance it offered or the quality of the outreach to those who within its areas of operation that were either in the helping professions or were studying to join them. They'll gladly take their money. After all, to be a doctor is to be rich. That might still be true. In return, they'll put their names on plaques on pews or on the outside walls. This building was made possible through the generosity of James Kildare, M.D. But as for guiding them to do the right thing, Not so much. I will say that things only galloped downhill beginning shortly after the Supreme Court's decision in Roe v. Wade in 1973. Some of those other precedents that I mentioned in other videos, like Everson v. Board of Education of Ewing and Lemon v. Kurtzman, cannot have helped either. Now that also explains why no one adequately defended in my schooling the proposition that God created the heavens and the earth and life on earth. The same held true at schools like Harvard, Yale, and Dartmouth, each of which began as seminaries. Now why, considering their beginnings, are they teaching a model of the beginning and change over time of life that renders God unnecessary? And for every person who denies that, 2 others will brazenly avow that is the case. Well, on November 9th, 1990, 1 year to the day after the fall of the Berlin Wall, everything changed. I prayed hard for the first time in my life for Jesus Christ to come into my life. And I felt something like a gentle electrical current moving through my body at the time. Now, I was in the Information Science Fellowship at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center at the time. And as it happened, I had at least 2 other members of the program to whom I could turn for guidance. And guidance I found. Before I go into that guidance in detail, I want to shout out to another sponsor, OurSilverLines.com. Do you feel like you're working harder for your money just to get by? It's not just you. The fluctuating economy, employment issues, and unexpected changes in people's lives have left many families struggling over the past few years. Collecting gold and silver can help shield you against many of these challenges. But if you're like me many years ago, you don't know where or how to start. Our Silver Lines helps by connecting you with thousands of members who are learning the secrets to creating and protecting true wealth by collecting precious metals. Whether you just want to collect rare and unique coins or take advantage of the business opportunities that company provides, they can help you learn to live an exceptional life. Visit OurSilverLines.com to learn how you can build a legacy for your future. Now, about my 2 guides. They taught me to question many things about the ancient history of the earth that I had always taken for granted. Once I thought through the half-truths, the omissions, the errors, I saw the inconsistencies in the grand evolutionary paradigm. Now that paradigm is actually a trident, and here are its teeth. Hyper-uniformitarianism, the proposition that all processes working today have been working at the same rate since time immemorial. Abiogenesis, that life began from non-life, and common descent, that everything descends from a common ancestral species or population. I do not accept any of that anymore, which is why I defend the science of creation, the active study of findings that tell us that God did create it all, and in the order in which He said He did. I have also been attending Baptist churches with a conservative bent, and in one case even a fundamentalistic one, run by a pastor who has taught at seminary level and who made his church a layman's community seminary. While there, I even extended my formal schooling so that I could read the New Testament in its original ancient Greek. We now come to conservative news and views. I founded that together with a good conservative friend of mine who lived in northern New Jersey in 2011. Before then, I had established myself as a conservative writer on the now defunct site Examiner.com. That's when I broke the original ClimateGate story by unpacking and distilling the infamous archive from the Climatic Research Unit, University of East Anglia, Norwich, England, UK. Not only did I get 35,000 page views in the first 24 hours, but I was also getting links even to the Wall Street Journal. I began to dig deeper, especially when the 15th Conference of Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change took place shortly thereafter in Copenhagen, Denmark. I wrote about it all the hypocrisies, all the double dealing, all the self-dealing, and how the deal eventually blew up. Then I branched out to cover creationism news, including every insight I had into creation science and into biblical scholarship. I also covered the one time in recent history in which anyone tried to recall a sitting United States senator, because New Jersey had no senators up for re-election then. It was then that my friend from northern New Jersey suggested that I start putting things together for a site of my very own. From the beginning, we took on stories no one else was willing to discuss. Obviously, it's been 11 years now. Among the many stories I have concentrated on are ClimateGate, which I've already mentioned. And then Obama's birth certificate. The one that looks as though someone photostated it out of a book and printed it on typical birth certificate paper. And released a PDF with multiple layers, which I teased apart to develop some very interesting findings. Tea Party organizations and politics. The first lawsuits to overturn Obamacare, including one that presented a few things everybody else missed, like that Ready Reserve Corps that's in the bill. The Benghazi incident, including the attempt to blame that on a failed movie trailer. The Boston Marathon bombing, which I practically live blogged, including when independent internet observers made the brothers Tsarnaev independently of the FBI. Midterms 2014. The candidacy, election, and programs of Donald J. Trump. Why Trump was right to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. The excellent appointments Trump made to the United States Supreme Court. What the world's climate activists really want, as a distinct from what they say they want, although some of them are just brazen enough to bring the two together. Why an Article 5 Convention of States is the worst mistake conservatives could make, because it would run away from them. Same as the Constitutional Convention of 1787 itself did. I include my interview with a nice little old lady who calls herself Publius Hulda. Hulda, after the prophetess of King Josiah's day. She has been campaigning actively against that kind of thing for years. Evidence that liberals are, by their very nature, a little funny in the head. And every conceivable reason why Donald J. Trump is not the President of the United States today. Now, with regard to that last, even the least honest political machine needs to deliver a solid baseline for victory. The Biden machine and the globalists behind it did that in 2020. Well, one thing we see going into midterms 2022 is that baseline won't be there this time. It might be gone already. The reasons for that are legion. They start with the economy that everybody knows is in the tank, even though Biden's spokespeople insist that it's the greatest in history. But they continue with the remarkable term that the United States Supreme Court has had. Now, I want you to wrap your minds around this. This court has overturned many, many precedents in which the political, secular, and atheistic left has relied for years. Most of you hearing me talk about this are going to think, aha, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, the case that overturned Roe versus Wade, and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Well, that too. And by the way, if you think that's going to bring the baseline back out, think again. Whatever is left of the baseline, we're already going to be out in whatever Forsaken mustard, just because Amy Coney Barrett replaced Ruth Bader Ginsburg. No, the Supreme Court came out with two rulings even more important than that. One of them was Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, that lets even faculty and staff pray silently on school grounds. Actually, if Coach Kennedy hadn't given it so much away, he could have won even more. The other case, and most devoted of all, is Carson versus Macon. That case directly says that government policies that deliberately shortchange religious institutions in consideration for any particular government program or programs are unconstitutional on their face. The left has already said that James G. Blaine must be spinning in his grave. Good! The Carson case, even more than the other two, tells Christians that the time for being ashamed to follow Christ and obey his commandments is over. Now we will be out in force in greater numbers than ever. Declarations of Truth got started toward the end of March of 2022, and as it began, I used to pick out the hard news item that was at or near the top of the trends and talk about that. Very soon I developed an avid interest in a few things that could have lasting significance, or they said a little something about our culture that most of the legacy media don't want to talk about. Now, many of you hearing this video now haven't heard my earlier videos, so I'll give you a few examples. They include the back and forth between Elon Musk and the board of directors of Twitter Incorporated. Now, that means more than 3 months ago. That dust up with Musk finally saying that he's done with Twitter is a lot more recent. I'm still trying to sort that out. Walt Disney's company falling on harder times every day, it seems, because they want to support the grooming of the little children who come to their parks. And I also touch on who started that and who might be trying to put a stop to it. Some of the Democratic Party's most reliable demographics suddenly shouting, "No mas," and abandoning the lockstep identity political voting patterns that have locked generations of these groups into voting Democratic until today. The spectacular election of Mayra Flores in the House as a Republican from South Texas, after she started pounding the pavement, knocking on doors, and getting on the phone. No one in her demographic had ever done that before, especially not for Republicans. She started doing that and immediately found sympathetic voices. That's how she held Biden's lead to 4 points in 2020 in her district, and then carried the district in a special election held just 2 months ago. The big leak of Sam Alito's first draft in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Organization, including how big a breach of security that was and still is. Who might have engineered the leak? How Sam Alito was going to take Roe versus Wade and the Casey decision apart, and how a certain political and spiritual battle would be only just beginning if the opinion held. And all the other decisions that started to come out toward the end of the term. The Dobbs decision held, as we all know. We got some insights into how the court's liberal wing thinks that maybe we didn't expect to know. But the bigger point is that Dobbs was not the most important decision to come out of the Supreme Court term, not by a long shot. I've told you what were Kennedy versus Bremerton School District and Carson versus Macon. So naturally, I covered what that means moving forward, and what kinds of things we should fight for to press the advantage we just gained. Especially the case of New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. As a matter of fact, that case has people already campaigning to repeal the Second Amendment. Good luck with that, of course, but at least somebody on that side is honest, or just brazen. Lots of exciting things coming up, and I intend to be there to cover them, like what will Virginia do with Dobbs versus Jackson Women's that came down with Republicans in the saddle? And by the way, the Jackson Women's of that decision is already shut up. Just saying. Will Texas enact a referendum on creating a study committee to secede from the Union? Or will they realize that secessionism is obsolete now that they can win the culture war nationwide? What arguments can we expect to hear on a very interesting case on which the court granted cert on the last day of its term? A redistricting case that actually has implications for all federal elections everywhere. I hope you've enjoyed this video, which certainly should give you plenty of things to think about and look forward to. In the meantime, do check out Conservative News and Views and our awesome CNAV Store and our sponsor, OurSilverLines.com. The place to start putting your money on a sound commodity basis. And on the end screen, I'm going to leave a subscribe link and a link to a little sample of videos that have come out lately. This is Terry A. Hurlbut for Declarations of Truth and for Conservative News and Views. Remember, let the truth set you free.